meeting's in order. We're expecting a few more folks. And based on minutes from the last meeting, I'm going to have a tough time beating 57 minutes.
It was 57?
You can do it.
Is that what it says in the minutes? Is that 10:27?
All right, yeah.
Maybe you all don't want me as the chair anymore.
We can all walk out after 56 minutes.
With that, give a chance to review the minutes. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve.
Except I wasn't here, so I can't say it.
You still can.
You
still
can?
can, even if you
But you
weren't
can't
here.
vote on it, right?
You can.
You can?
vote on it, yes.
Okay, I did read the minutes. They look fine. I move approval.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Those opposed? Pass it. Raise your right hand or raise any hand?
Don't get
I
that
think
hand.
we're fine. Either hand. Both.
I just gave you some kudos.
Oh, really?
For having probably the record of 57 minutes for a meeting. I don't know how I'm going to. What happens when
This minutes for years.
Here we go. You just passed the minute. Any public comment, communications from the public, members? Okay.
Just wanted to say that Susan Huntington is filling in for Jose today, who's on vacation. Susan Huntington leads our Transnet project office. And so, yep. So she has Richard Chavez's old post. Glad to be here. Thank you.
I asked Susan yesterday where Richard is. I haven't seen him.
Yeah, he's a PM now. Yeah.
Consent items 3, 4, and 5. 2 are information, 1's accept. So do we need to, as a package, recommend consent? You want to go one at a time, or just all 3?
All 3 is fine.
We need to get staff reports on any of these? This is easy one. Maybe I will dash.
Can I make one comment about the mini grants, which I always look at, and I want to compliment. I see that. Are you here today for mini grant? Oh, okay. She is. I want to say that I like the way that you're watching over these things, and your explanations are good. So thank you.
Thank you.
I thought what was interesting, I asked Ariana yesterday on number 5 that some of these cities have their programs in place all the way since 2008 and haven't really needed to change their formulas or anything. So it's even just send a letter to us.
That's right. That's right. If no major changes, then we just ask that they send us a letter verifying, and then you verify that as part of your fiscal audit. So next year you would be looking at that.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to accept the consent?
Yes.
I so move.
Second. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Would you like to next to you? Great. On to reports. Ariana, summary of what's been happening with transportation board.
Yeah, since your March meeting, the board held its annual retreat. The potential ballot measure was discussed. Vice Chair Halpern, I believe he attended the meeting. And there also were subsequent Transportation Committee and board meetings where alternative approaches to an expenditure plan have been, and the funding measure were presented, ranging from drafts with a more local infrastructure emphasis and others with a more regional emphasis, and other iterations that have been based on board and public input. The current alternative that's being discussed includes an option for an increase in formula funding allocation for the local jurisdictions for higher priority projects, and also incorporating an early action program into the language of the draft ordinance. Currently we have an early action program, but that came after the ordinance had passed. And that's also been discussed based on feedback from the board. Then last week at its April 8th meeting, staff presented the board with the results of the most recent public information survey, and voter sentiment is moving in a positive direction on that. And then in terms of next steps, staff is scheduled to return to the board meeting on April 22nd with final revisions to a proposed expenditure plan. And then on April 29th, there will be a special meeting of the board where they're expected to make a final decision on whether or not to move forward with the proposed ballot in November. And then staff would be providing an update at your May meeting on the details following that April 29th meeting. So we'll be back with an update on that. And then in terms of other items, the Transportation Committee received the quarterly report on the EMP Land Management Grant Program, and that's on your agenda today. Your auditors and Chair Barnum presented the draft fiscal year 2015 fiscal and compliance audit results that you accepted at your March meeting. And then the request by the City of Oceanside for use of the commercial paper program, which you saw at your March meeting as well, that's scheduled for review by the Transportation Committee this Friday and by the board next Friday. You'll recall that to maintain eligibility for receipt of funds, the transit operators have to limit their increase in operating costs to no more than the increase in CPI. And then when there are unusual circumstances, there is a process for requesting an exception to that rule, and the ordinance allows that. MTS and NCTD were both here at your March meeting and requested a recommendation, which you provided. Transportation Committee also recommended that approval for the board's consideration at their April 1st meeting. And there was discussion at the Transportation Committee meeting regarding compliance with that bus and the rail metric in years when CPI is negative. And then given that MTS and NCTD both have taken measures to control costs, and that's the intent of the ordinance. And so from that standpoint, they are fulfilling that intent. There was discussion among the Transportation Committee members about how to better capture that intent, and questions were raised about whether a blending of indices or potentially using a different metric to measure compliance may be more appropriate. So we may be coming back to a future meeting with some more information on that.
I have a question. In essence, how will this new tax measure differ from the old one? And I'm thinking in terms of what proportions will be allocated for transit, freeways, bikes, etc., and what will the tax rate be, and what will the time frame be?
It's still a half-cent measure. I think it's still being discussed, so it's not something that has been decided yet.
So right now, what the board's considering is a 40-year half-cent new tax. So it's the remaining capacity that SANDAG has under state statute. In terms of the allocations to various categories, Ariana talked about, we initially started with what we called sort of bookends. One that provided more money, so like as much money as kind of locals to local formulas, so agencies in the county, and the other one that provided a lot of funding with regard to like regional projects, public transportation. We went to the board retreat. They wanted something sort of in the middle, and so we brought them back, options with regard to that, which gives a lot of discussion at the board retreat was the local jurisdictions wanted to have a little bit more control over some of the formula funds to meet their individual needs. And so there's what's called the refined hybrid that's out now. We've been asked to work with the transit operators. They want a little different shifts between new projects and kind of state of good repair existing projects. So that's what's coming back. So my recollection is the formula program is about, I don't have it off the top of my head, 40% local and
Okay.
And where it's different in the current transit extension measure is that the current transit extension measure is focused on transportation. SANDAG statutory authority includes both open space, stormwater, and water quality improvements. And so these formula funds would be actually, the eligible uses would be brought into more than transportation, because that was one of the intents on open space and addressing water quality and stormwater improvement. So some of that language is going to come back. Local eligibility is going to come back. The draft proposal will come back to the board next Friday. And then this concept of an early action program will also come back to the board, because they wanted to include something in the ordinance about which projects would kind of be focus of this, the early focus of this measure.
Well, since we already have a Transnet
Right.
plan in place, does this, in effect, will raise the tax rate to what rate? And when would it start? If it, like, say they went to November, would it start in January, and what would the effective tax
It
rate?
typically is to start kind of the ones that have passed in November, typically, the new tax starts being collected April 1st of the following year. So April
So it'll be
1st
in addition to what we have?
Correct,
Okay.
right. And then let's see, what's our tax right now is 8%, right?
I thought it was 8 1/4.
Depends where you live.
Depends where you live, and then.
That's
it's
right,
higher-
because you get
Sort of
dinged
city
one way or
tax.
another.
Yeah, just like City of San Diego is 8%, so if this were to pass, it'd be 8.5%. It'd be different in, I think there's 4 cities that also have their own sales taxes, so let's say what, La Mesa, El Cajon, National City, and Vista, maybe? I forget, there's 4. So it's slightly higher in those cities because they have approved their own local sales tax increase.
Either way.
Two quick questions. I presume it's a 2/3 requirement.
Yes, yes.
All right. And I also presume that if passed, it will come under the oversight responsibility of this ITOC, correct?
Yes, that hasn't been decided, but yes, they were, I think that's staff's proposal that we wouldn't, that number one, taxpayer oversight is important. And that it'd be better not to have, better to consolidate it under one body versus having,
Yes, that
separate
makes sense.
oversight. So we're still, those details are still being
Debated.
drafted and debated. I mean,
I saw the number 68.7% in the newspaper, and based upon polling, we're in favor of this.
So what the board heard last Friday was results of some public surveys, public information surveys, which we tested some ballot language, and the first reading of that ballot language was about a 68%.
Right. So it's close, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Justin?
I just have a question about on the chargers proposal for a tax increase for TOT. Does that have any bearing on whether or not the public is, in your opinion, be willing to do this sand egg bond measure? Will they look at it and say, I don't want to do 2 taxes, or?
We didn't really test that specifically. I mean, just sort of general, we've heard from some of the discussion at the board retreat with some of our speakers there, was that obviously, yes, anything that multiple tax measures or multiple, proposals on a ballot, I would say reduces generally is not favorable to any single one. But we didn't specifically test whether the chargers measure or not would affect it.
Stuart, you were, any comments? I know you were
Yeah,
there for the second year in a row, so.
Yeah, I was going to say that among the many interesting presentations for people who weren't able to get there, and I don't know if the materials are still available online.
Yes.
But there was one in particular that I thought was really informative, and I can't recall whose presentation it was. It was the one that showed around the county where people lived and where they worked.
Right.
And if just for information purposes for folks, I would particularly point to that one as if you had some time to take a look at it. It's just immensely informative and really displays the complexity of the transportation problem around the region, because it's not merely the case that, as in other cities, you've got people from around the region tending to come into one place, which makes a mass transit solution a lot simpler. My observation was that it was kind of all over the place with regard to San Diego County.
We can share that. We can send you guys a link to that. Actually, Ray Major, our chief economist, put together those maps, helped put together those maps.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating presentation.
Good, I'm glad you went. I know you were thinking about going there.
Oh, but unfortunately, I have back surgery, so that stopped me from attending. I am.
Ariane, I think that was it. Thank you for the fiscal audit discussion on NCT. Yes.
Can I ask one more question of Kim? Kim, what is the feeling about the polling? I know that polling can say anything depending on who's polled you know, and where, and what category they fall under. So was it a pretty comprehensive poll, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a poll of likely voters, so it's not just the San Diego region as a whole. It is a survey or a poll of likely voters. It's similar to research we've done last year. So as a, sort of a comparison, though, it's the first time I think that in the ballot measure language on first reading it was in excess of the 2/3 threshold. So one of the things the consultant, this survey consultant had said was that, I mean, a number of things. The ballot language was drafted a little bit, differently, and also that at least the survey of likely voters, generally the voter pool skewed a little bit more toward the liberal side.
It's interesting, one of the board members asked, transportation members, asked the consultant what the voter turnout was, model of this poll was, and he said it was 80%, I believe.
Yeah.
And last time in 2008, it was 75%. When Obama was elected, I think it was big, but he's anticipating it's higher than that, which I thought was.
We never get that in the city of San
No,
Diego.
Yeah.
Is this the November
The
ballot?
November ballot. I thought that was awfully high, but
I wonder if it's the Charger situation.
it's probably the president. It's probably the presidential race.
Yeah, who cares, right? They only
It's
care
only
about the
the
charge.
president.
Trump's in versus. Thank you. Let's see, we have growth incentive program and active transportation programs, and Susan is here somewhere.
Right here. Good morning. Sandback staff provides a quarterly report for the Transnet Smart Growth Incentive Program and Active Transportation Grant Program projects to ITOC, the Transportation Committee, and the Regional Planning Committee. And the two grant programs award both capital and planning grants through competitive processes to assist local jurisdictions in implementing and planning projects that support smart growth and active transportation projects. The progress report, which is found in attachment 1, provides summary information for the 3 funding cycles for both programs and shows the status of grant projects through December 31st, 2015. Since May 2009, the San Diego Board of Directors has awarded almost $55 million to fund 113 local projects that will help implement San Diego Forward, the regional plan. 43 Smart Growth Incentive Program projects, of which 13 have been completed, and 70 active transportation projects, of which 47 have been completed. A total of 60 projects, just over 1/2, have been completed. As of December 31st, 2015, all active transportation grant projects are on schedule, and all but one of the Smart Growth Incentive Program projects are on schedule. The City of Lemon Grove is requesting a 6-month schedule amendment for the Main Street Promenade Extension Planning Project, and a letter requesting that extension can be found in attachment 2. And the extension is being requested to address some issues that they've run into with SDG&E and Union Pacific Railroad that are necessary, that need to be resolved in order to complete the design of their project. Lemon Grove is committed to completing the project by January 8th, 2017. And Dave DeVries, who's the project manager and the community development director from the City of Lemon Grove, is here to answer any questions if you have any. And we are asking you for a recommendation to forward on to the Regional Planning Committee on this schedule extension. Thank you.
Are you the person?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Okay, my question is, it has to do with this spreadsheet, which is our last page of our exhibit.
You come up here just in case.
Yeah, sure.
The microphone. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Looks like you come prepared.
don't know how long it will be, but just in case.
Okay, well, I want to give him a chance to figure out where his papers are, right? Okay, my question on this spreadsheet is, why were unrealistic milestones accepted? Because it looks like you have revised your environmental clearance and everything else, but not just by a small fraction, but by quite a significant amount of time. So I guess my question is, what happened that these milestones were so far off the original plan?
Well, let's see, I took over the project in November of last year, and my predecessor, the Development Services Director for the City of Lemon Grove, I'm currently the Development Services Director for the city. I took over a couple weeks ago. And my predecessor, Carol Dick, was the previous project manager, and then in November she left to be the director with the City of La Mesa. And my understanding from her is everything was on target, and then they had some conflicts with this SDG&E vault in a very critical location for this Connect Main Street project. And it's a very exciting project for the city. It's basically this 2-mile stretch of roadway along the trolley line that connects 2 trolley stations. And we're creating a lot of activity centers along this stretch, and then also this biking and walking corridor. And so across the street from this Main Street trolley station is this very critical segment, and it's basically a gateway into this promenade location. And the city council had desired to put a skate park there as an activity and energizing program for that area, and then SCG comes in and says they want to put a vault in that same location. And so that basically took everything and started, and this was after the environmental documents were already basically drafted. We had the concept already designed, and we already had buy-off from the city council on the concept. So everything was on target until this new element came into play. And so that's why all of the timelines had to come down after that. And coordination with SDG unfortunately has been very slow, and there were delays because of the transition between Carol and myself. You know, I was completely, I was familiar with the project, but not the details of the project. I wasn't the assistant project manager by any means. So there was, with a 2-mile stretch of capital improvements, there's a lot to learn. And the project had been going on for 2 years, and all the public outreach had already been given, and I wasn't in attendance at those meetings and such. So there was a lot to catch up on from my perspective as well. And so, this additional extension is in my mind, we have really no issues now. We basically kind of wrapped up things with SDG. They're just getting us a new detail for that particular vault location. Now we can put the skate park where we want it, and then we're coordinating with Union Pacific on getting some improvements out of their right-of-way. And so we're just redesigning this one segment of the whole 2-mile stretch of road. And then, our goal is to get this forward to City Council as soon as it's redesigned and adopted.
Okay, so my question is, will you have to do anything to your environmental document because of the changes, or is everything taken care of?
Everything's taken care of.
Okay, and it says your vault location was estimated this month to be completed, so everything's good?
Yes. So we're doing well. They have the concept where the vault's going to be drafted. They're just giving us the specifics on gas lines right now.
Okay, one last question. Do you have a utility coordinator as part of your project management process, or you do not?
Yeah, as far as we have Michael Baker would be our consultants doing the utility coordination for the project, who's contracted through KTUNA as the utility coordinator for the city. And then we also have engineering staff at our city that's helping us with the coordination.
The reason I asked that is because it sounds like that was the big hang up, and so I wonder, do you think your consultant was doing a good job? or what do you think? I'm serious, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I think, so my understanding is they wanted to get the concept right first. So they worked initially on the concept, which, in hindsight, I think it would have been better if we worked on the utility coordination first to see exactly what we're putting these improvements on. And so, I would say that in hindsight, that probably would have been the better way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm speaking as a construction guy, if I may. I have no objections to the extension. I'm sure there's no alternative. But January 8th is less than 9 months away. And looking at your letter, you've got to finish the EIR. You have to finalize the vault location. Then you have to finish your 30% construction drawings, coordinate public noticing and hearings. Then you put it out to bid, I presume, $400,000 job. It's not a huge job, but it's still a lot of steps to go through. Then you have to build it. And you expect to finish all this in less than 9 months. I've never seen a city be able to move that fast in my life.
This is a planning project, so this is just the plans.
Oh,
this is not the construction.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
But I do wish we had the funding to build it already as
That'll
well.
be the next step.
Well, yeah, we'll be coming back for that.
It is interesting to notice that this is a long process for this point. I mean, it's
But it was the utilities
Yeah.
that they didn't
In
see.
general.
All right, so then you're going to, you don't have the money yet for construction.
Yeah, so once we have the general plan amendment done, approved by city council, and then the 30% drawings finished, the project's finished as far as the grant's concerned. And then that's when we'll work on funding.
Thank
That's
you.
good. Thank you for putting that out.
So my question is just related to the EIR. I see the finalized EIR. Is that the draft public review document's already been distributed, or is that the final EIR that it incorporates everybody's comments and goes to your council for approval?
So we're doing a mitigated negative declaration on this, and there's about 1,000 pages of technical studies that's already been completed. We've had our city engineer review it, and they've already bought off on it. So the environmental, as far as the document goes, is done. So we're just gonna whatever that final piece is gonna look like, we're gonna forward that with it, because that's not gonna change the environmental clearance at all.
I guess my question, has the document been distributed for public review yet?
No, yeah, it will be, yes, yeah. But I don't anticipate that being distributed until we have the redesign completed.
Okay, so the finalized environmental is the draft public review document. Is it controversial? Does anybody have any issues that you're aware of with the project?
Well, technically, we are affecting a lot of property owners because their access to their properties along this main street is affected, and it's going to create a lot more pedestrians and bikes along their in front of their residence and things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if there are some objections, but we have done a really complete public outreach program, and we've identified those issues and addressed them. But you never know what comes out, at the 11th hour on these types of things. But I'm not presuming there to be any conflicts at this point.
Okay. The only reason I ask is I've been in situations where 8, 12 months from issuance of the draft document to the preparation of a final document has occurred, and I just want to make sure you have enough time to.
Yeah, so this works a lot differently than an environmental impact report in that regard. So it'll just be a mitigated negative declaration.
I would think you would still want to respond to public comment.
Oh yeah, no, yes, yeah, certainly, yeah, yeah.
I move that we recommend approval.
Is there a second? Any more comments, discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. No opposition.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Number 8, financial issues. Andre and Ray, a review of proposed 2016 president bond issuance. Good to see you too.
Yeah, good morning, thank you. So in January, the Board of Directors approved the 2015 Trends and Plan of Finance update. which anticipated us issuing up to $350 million in bonds to continue advancing the transit early action program. And so with the assistance of our financial advisors, PFM, Public Financial Management, we have procured a group of investment bankers to help us with this, a Citigroup being the lead banker, and Goldman Sachs, Stifel, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan are co-managers. We've also hired our bond counsel and our disclosure counsel to assist with the 2016 bond transaction. So the bonds are proposed to be sold as a traditional tax-exempt fixed rate, taking advantage of the really low rates that we see in the markets right now. We anticipate the all-in cost to be approximately 3.7%. And the expectation is that the bonds will be structured just like our 2010, 2012, and 2014, which was a level debt service through 2048. So with the additional $350 million in bonds, the debt service will increase from $84 million annually to $103 million annually, which gives us a debt service coverage right now at 3.2. It will decrease down to 2.6, but which is still a fairly strong debt service coverage. And based on that, we'll go out to Standard & Poor's and Fitch for ratings on this transaction. I'll now turn it over to Ray just to kind of give us a flavor of what the economy is like right now.
Well, the Federal Reserve met in March, where the Federal Open Market Committee put forward that economic activity in the U.S. had been expanding at a moderate pace, despite the fact that global economy and financial developments in recent months have been a little bit tempered. In the U.S., household spending had been increasing at a moderate rate. The housing sector had improved, and fixed business investment and net exports have been soft. So they also reported that there were a range of other indicators, such as strong job growth, that pointed to additional strength in the labor market, and this started to build a case for the Fed to raise rates in the near future, which seems to be implicit in their statements. However, the assessment was tempered in the last week when economists cut the forecast for the U.S. growth for the first quarter of 2016. So falling car sales, equipment purchases by businesses, and downward revisions to consumer spending have helped to moderate their view. The net result of all of this is that the economy continues to grow at a snail's pace, and that makes it difficult for the Fed to raise rates significantly in the near future. Nevertheless, the Fed will continue to attempt to normalize the short-term interest rates back to the 3% level, and they will consider accelerating interest rates hikes as the economy shows signs of strengthening. So, moreover, the strengthening of the labor market that I mentioned earlier, in the form of very low unemployment rates, is starting to put pressure on wages, and this leads to inflation expectations, which gives the Fed another opening to push rates higher. Well, that makes now, 2016, a good time for Sandag to issue bonds. The current market for highly rated bonds, like the ones that we issue, provide a favorable borrowing environment amid continued global and domestic volatility and advantageous municipal market supply and demand.
And so Sandag staff has also reached out to all our member agencies to let them know if they have any local street improvements projects are eligible for transit funding. They may elect to participate in this bond so they can accelerate their funding and implementation of those projects. We've given them until the end of this month to come back and let us know, but as of today we haven't heard back from anybody. So our team is right now working on the appropriate bond documents. We anticipate going to the market sometime in June with the transaction closing approximately in July of this year. So that ends our report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, I have two questions. I'll give them to you together. This is sort of like me going out and borrowing money to build something in the future. First of all, you said that the DCR, debt coverage ratio, will drop, you estimate, from 3.2 to 2.6. First question, which is a simple number, at what point do you think it is not comfortable, a comfortable DCR? And my second question is, you're proposing to borrow money, which good climate, to spend money on early action projects. And my question is, what are the early action projects that this money would be spent on? This is a pretty basic question that justifies going into debt to speed up projects. Do you have any identified? So those are my two questions.
Sure.
What's DCR and early action projects?
Okay. Well, first of all, our bond documents say that we can't go below 2 times coverage.
Below what?
2.0.
2.0.
Right. And so at 2.6, that's a number that's still above that.
Well, this was over 4 when I started on this committee.
Right.
So as we keep going.
Yeah, and initially we had our coverage at 1.5. We pushed it up to 2. And so we're still at 2.6, we're still above it. Now, we do have AAA ratings from S&P and Fitch when we're at 3.2. Do we get the same AAA ratings at 2.6? It's a question, something that the team is working on. But we know that we'll definitely be in the high, if it's not a AAA, we may be 1 notch below that. But it's, the second part of the question is the early action projects that we've identified. And the Midcoast project is one that is outside of what we're actually anticipating to borrow. Obviously, that's one of the early action programs. But the ones, the $350 million that we're expecting to spend on these, there's probably 10 of the early action program projects that we're looking at, the BRT projects, the multitude of double tracking projects. I could certainly get a list for you that will show you the specific projects that we're looking to borrow.
So the earlier action, you may recall in the last year, beginning of this year, you guys reviewed the Transnet Plan of Finance. And so these are the same projects. At that time when that was approved, it anticipated about, I think, $400 million. A much higher amount of us going out this year for a bond issuance. So it's those same projects from the Plan of Finance. It's nothing's changed. Midcoast is the big one, the North Coast Corridor, which includes both the double tracking and widening of I-5, South Bay Rapid, all the same sort of projects in the Transit Early Action Program. Those are all the expenditures.
If this new bond measure passes, will that money be joined in, mingled with the existing money for these early action projects? Can it be used to finish these jobs?
I mean,
Wait, he said bond, does he mean,
Yeah,
do you mean the
the
Transnet?
The HFCIT.
Yeah.
They're definitely in the expenditure plan right now. There is some overlap in the program of projects between the new potential funding measure under consideration and your current transit measure. But that decision on, whether to supplement bonds or to supplement funding for these current set of projects has not been determined yet. Those details have not been worked out yet. But there are some overlap.
Stuart, you're the finance.
Yeah, just, Andre, following up on the issue of the ratings, recognizing that credit ratings are a very complex process and there's no one particular number that is, is the magic number. The debt service coverage probably is a fairly prominent one. Based on information you've seen to date, could you say that dipping below 3 or dipping below 2.75 might tend to be a place where a AAA rating would come under threat, based on the other ratings that for similar entities out there?
Yeah, so we've spent some time with our financial advisors talking about this, and we're at the point that we're right there. The good news is, we continue to expect sales tax to increase. So as sales tax increases, that 2.6, if we didn't issue any more debt, we'll slowly climb up to 3 to 3.5. If we don't, issue any additional debt. So we're right at the cusp. And I think even last time when we went to the rating agencies, one of their main questions was how much additional debt are you going to issue? And at the time we had mentioned that we're going to issue between $600 and $900 million. So they know it's not like this is suddenly something that that wasn't in the plan of finance. It's always been there. They've always seen it. So they had comfort knowing that we're going to come to the market with up to an additional $900 million. So they gave us the AAA ratings. But now that we're actually doing it, obviously we'll get another review, which we're actually planning on doing sometime in May with both rating agencies. So again, I think it's going to be people like Ray describing our economy, how strong it is, that we expect to see sales tax continue to grow. That should give them some comfort. But I think we're right there.
And so then, just to help me understand from a structural standpoint, these would be bonds secured by the general credit of Sandag. So for example, if the incremental sales tax were passed, that would enhance the credit worthiness underlying Sandag, or is that, or is the structure such that the bonds are specifically backed by the revenue, if you will, of the current transit project and or sales tax and other specific sources?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, first of all, just to make sure, this is not Sandag's credit, right? It's the Commission's credit that's backing it. And the sales tax that we currently have, the 0.5% covers this. Certainly, if we're to bring an additional 0.5% and layer on top of it, our debt service coverage will go up tremendously. So it would be a benefit to current bondholders. And like Kim said, that's a discussion that we're still having as to what makes best sense for us going forward, which direction to go.
Okay, well, I think you've answered the essence of my question. So if the new measure passes, that enhances
Yes.
the credit worthiness.
The new measure, so some of it's timing, right? So the new measure, if number one, if the board decides to go, and then number two, if voters actually approve it in November, we're not going to know whether that happens in time for the planned issuance of the bond.
No, I understand that, but on a go-forward basis,
On a go-forward,
the
yes,
credit
there's
worthiness is
time.
enhanced because this would be incremental revenue if the new tax is passed.
Yes.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, technically, and if we write our bond documents that way, it would be, but yes.
Right, so part of underlying Jonathan's question was if there's risk to the credit rating on this particular offering, having the incremental sales tax going forward would be enhancing the credit worthiness on a go-forward basis. Is that a fair?
That's right.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is an off-the-wall question, don't spend any time. Would you happen to know what the debt coverage ratio is for the federal government?
I don't, but I'll research that next time.
And if it's too depressing, put it on a piece of paper, will you?
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's the information item. Anything else? Thank you, too. It's always an interesting topic. Michelle, good to see you again.
Hello,
The 2014 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, amendment number 10.
Yes. So at its April 22nd, 2016 meeting, the Sandag Board of Directors is scheduled to approve Amendment Number 10 to the 2014 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. The ITROC is asked to review and discuss these projects included in this proposed amendment, focusing their review on Transnet-funded projects. Amendment Number 10 to the 2014 RTIP is being processed in addition to the regular quarterly amendment to accommodate the fiscal year 2017 Transit Capital Improvement Program, and is detailed in the discussion section of your report starting on page 2. And we have Eric Chain from MTS and Luz Capesi-Howe from NCTD to answer any specific questions you might have for the transit agencies on this amendment. In attachment 1 of your backup, beginning on page 4, you will find the changes proposed in this amendment specifically for those projects funded with Transnet. Each project includes Transnet funding at the top, followed by any other funding source programmed on this project. And then we also show Transnet subtotals and other subtotals to inform you of how much Transnet and other funds are programmed per project. Any questions on table 1?
I had a question. I talked to Susan and Ariana about this yesterday. The Mid-Coast.
Yes.
And, I know Jim is here. Could you explain this to me a little bit on so what the increase was about? The project, total project increases by $483 million, bringing the total of $2.1 billion. It just seemed like a large change, but I think it had to do with the TIFIA loan or something. But if you can explain that.
Yeah, thank you. What that has to do with is the federal government will participate at a 50% share of the financing cost for Midcoast. So normally, for the early action program, the financing costs for the program are all added on at the end and taken into account for the program. But because Midcoast has a full funding grant agreement, or will soon have a full funding grant agreement, we've added in the financing cost that's normally distributed from the program into the project. And so that's the vast majority of it, of that additional $400 and some million. It's the financing cost that we added to the project. Some of the other more traditional cost increases to the project is we've always assumed that the contractor could complete the work faster than 56 months, and that's what we've negotiated with our contractors, a 56-month construction schedule. And so with that comes cost escalation. And so when you take a project this big, we escalate the costs for an extra, portion of a year. So that's part of it. And then the soft costs, the construction management, the design support, and things like that, the costs that go along with it. And then finally, also part of that is, this was a chance to actually true up the budget, the actual hard construction budget. Because it's a full funding grant agreement project, every time you change anything, the ripple effect of that through the project with the federal government is huge. Documents upon documents have to be changed. And so we always put the board on notice that this is what the current scheduled budget is for the project, but we didn't true up the budget until we had a guaranteed maximum price with our contractor. And so this also trued up the budget. But the biggest single increase by far is the adding the interest cost.
Thank you. Susan expressed that too yesterday. It was good to hear from you on that.
So we're consistent?
Yeah, we're good.
Just to muddy the waters here.
Yeah.
I was looking at your page 7, and you show in 18-19, you've got other Fed source of funds, 585, and then you've got a payback of the same exact amount. I was sort of wondering, hey, don't spend any time on it, but I just thought it was interesting. The way you showed it on that, I don't understand how you get money to pay back another source. But
And
is there a simple solution?
Absolutely. The solution is ask Andre.
The TIFIA that we're borrowing, basically why we're doing that is because it's actually, for example, the 3.7% that I said that we would be spending on our bonds, or the rate that we'd be paying. The TIFIA rate is actually the 30-year Treasury plus 1 basis points. So today, the 30-year Treasury is 260, would be 261. So basically, it's a lot cheaper financing vehicle for us.
So you're borrowing from TIFIA right now?
We haven't yet, but we plan to borrow approximately $560 million from TIFIA for the Midcoast. Correct.
And then in 18-19, you're going to get some money from TIFIA to pay back the TIFIA loan?
Not from TIFIA, then we'll be basically paying back TIFIA from our sales tax proceeds going forward. So it's basically, just like we do with our bonds, we basically pay back bonds with our sales tax proceeds that we get. We'll be paying back the TIFIA with our sales tax.
I'm sorry, you show a source from TIFIA of 585 and also a payback of a loan. I mean, but maybe we shouldn't spend time on this. But I was just curious, you do show more TIFIA money coming at that time to pay itself back. Did you
We can certainly look into that.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't need to know.
7.
But that's what your document on
-1.
page 7 shows.
So your question?
Oh.
Are you asking about just the timing? Because
Well, I don't understand.
We're getting the money and paying it back the same year.
You're getting the money from TIFIA and paying it back the same year. That's never mind. It's.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's okay.
What happened? Oh, no.
thank you. Don't worry. I looked at that. I tried to figure out what you were doing.
It's like circuits.
We will figure that out.
Okay,
It doesn't-
that's enough.
The good news is that
It's
TIFIA loan
coming in
is
ending here. It's
better
represented
terms.
in the
Oh, I accept that.
And-
I understand.
And they
I
are
accept
ready to
that.
go for us.
I just didn't understand that one page.
Well, at the end, if it's happening within the same year, then I think that clears up the confusion. When you just look at a chart, line 3 and line 6 in that year, 2018-19, you see a negative and a positive with the same number. Just looks confusing, but if it's because it's all happening in the same year, then that makes it clear.
well, it's actually so the budget's going to show the budget goes out to 2025,
Right.
but because the RTIP stops at FY18, we have to show all that funding in 1 year. So in reality, it's all the way out to 2025. If that clears it up. But because we want to show all of the funding and that we know that we're getting all the funding in and we will be paying it back, we're showing it all in that last year. Turnout.
Okay, if you, as long as you can straighten it out and understand it, I'm satisfied. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Are you still on?
I'm
this
still
slide
going.
Thank you for
You
that.
still got me.
No, thank you.
So on attachment 2, table 2, which is shown on page 16, this provides a cumulative capacity analysis in regards to revenue versus programs of the Transnet Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, and the Transit System Improvements, or TSI, through Amendment number 10 for the transit agencies. And these funds are distributed to the transit agencies on a formula basis as per the Transnet ordinance and approved at your February meeting. And that is the end of my presentation. Any questions on table 2?
Great. Thank you. Number 10, you back at it?
So we have Amendment 11, which will be going to the SANDAG Board of Directors at their April 22nd meeting as well. And this actually represents the regular quarterly amendment and is detailed in the discussion section. We're starting on page 2 of your agenda item. And also in attachment 1 on your backup on table 1, beginning on page 7, are the changes proposed in this amendment specifically for those projects funded with Transnet funds. Any questions on the discussion section or table 1? Table 2, which begins on page 40, provides the cumulative capacity analysis in regards to revenue versus program of the Transnet Local Streets Improvements, or LSI funds, for amendment number 11 for all agencies. And you might notice there are a couple of negative balances, and that is because we decreased the current fiscal year's Transnet revenue from the 4% to the 3%, but we did not require the local agencies to reprogram at this time. They'll be reprogramming as part of the 2016 RTIP update. They are aware that they will only receive what we get in revenues, not what they've programmed up to. So that's why there's a couple negatives on this chart. And anybody that's less than the 75% threshold that the ITALC has established has footnotes at the bottom of the chart as well. And then attachment 3 on page 41 includes the map. It shows the major transportation projects included in this amendment. And that concludes my report for Amendment 11.
Michelle, go back. I was getting those up for a second on attachment 1. The top of page 5, the group projects for active transportation program.
Sure.
Again, I asked Ariana yesterday, but it looks like you can ask the state for a grant. At the same time, you can ask SANDAG for a grant.
Yeah, so the state call for projects and the Transnet active transportation call for projects went at the same time this go round. So they submitted the same project for both.
How common is that for, I mean, you get 2 grants at the same time and actually?
It doesn't normally happen very often. I think this is the first time we've had this issue.
Because I'm wondering if some cities try, or some groups try to get.
Some of them did submit similar projects, kind of like different phases, and so they did that way.
Okay. Good, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Ariana?
Yes. So we have an update on your 3rd triennial performance audit. You'll recall that at your June 2015 meeting, so just a little under a year ago, you accepted the results of that performance audit. And as with prior audits, we bring to you twice a year kind of a status of how we're doing in terms of implementing all the recommendations. And that is what is shown in attachment 1 of your report. This time we went ahead and added a column since the spreadsheet would have been even busier if we had done more track changes. So let us know if that meets your needs. We've also added the ITALC member leads for each of the recommendations, similar to the last audit. And as we discussed at your last, at the meeting back in September, when you reviewed we reviewed the first status. And we've also grayed out the recommendations that have been completed to date. There's 2 recommendations that we've implemented so far and 1 partial recommendation. And I think we're making good progress toward completing the majority of the remainder of recommendations probably in the next year, year and a half or so, certainly by the time the next audit begins in FY18. And we plan to bring you another update probably in the September-October timeframe. And so today we're just asking for you to discuss the status of the implementation of the recommendations.
I'm sure there's some discussion on the side. Yes.
Should we, that item number 18?
Number 18?
Yes.
Okay, is that the ITALC member term one?
That has to do with our.
Our last one? Okay.
I thought I didn't see it in there. I thought that successor ITALC members could be brought in for a 3-year term or a 5-year term or something like that. That was considered or under consideration.
It is,
And
it is.
okay, I didn't see that in
So-
here.
Right, so currently midterm vacancies,
Oh, you're looking into that.
we're looking into whether or not we could
But-
extend it.
But I believe you also considered extending or reducing the length of successor ITALC members to just on a one-time basis.
On a one-time, yes.
And I didn't see that in the write-up.
Okay. We
I-
could,
I didn't attend the October meeting. I was traveling
Yeah.
but I heard that's what you were
yeah,
considering.
right, as long as it's within the 8-year term limit, overall limit,
Well,
I think
however
that
you
that
want
would
to
be
handle it, but I mean,
something
if
that
this
we
is a
look at.
serious problem
Mhm.
to you, I thought that was also under consideration.
Okay.
That's it.
Didn't we have that discussion though at the October meeting and we said that it really hasn't been a problem so far?
It hasn't been, and that's how come we we have some time before the next solicitation,
Oh, I
which
see.
is not until
Okay.
May 2017. So, so we're looking into it. But,
All right, good.
yeah, at this point, it's not.
Brad, there's a gentleman over this hand.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Apologize.
So, not having directly with the performance audit really yet, at what point do we start as a lead for our coordinating with staff or reviewing stuff or ensuring that, in my case, the EMP to ensure transit funding is utilized in the most effective manner? At what point does that process formally begin or in earnest begin or?
It's really on a case-by-case basis. With the last audit, there was a lot to do in terms of the local street and road program recommendation. And so we held several meetings with Jonathan at that point. And so, I mean, I think it's, if you have a specific question, then we could put you in touch with Keith, who's leading the implementation of those, or vice versa. If we would like to get your direction or, input or more detail on how you'd like us to proceed, then we would follow up with you. So it's more of a case by case, so as things come up, not necessarily something that we're.
So that sounds reasonable, and I don't think that, I'll reach out to Keith and just see if he needs me to do or wants me to do. There's no direction I
Be great.
think I would give him, but, okay, thank you.
And we had discussed yesterday, Ariana and Susan, about I think item 6, expand on existing local street and road performance output data. I can't recollect, we were talking about this here, we were talking about sort of the quality of thickness of how cities report the I guess quality or how long, if they're paving a certain amount of roads, how to kind of track how good it's been, or if it's failing, or how often they have to go back. What are we gonna do about that? Is there some sort of standard we're gonna start to get out to cities about tracking? I know Michelle's here too.
So what we started to do is we started to track the projects through Project Track, so through the RTIP. So any project that's a program with Transmet LSI funds, we're asking them to give us some additional information on. So we've broke down the projects into the categories included in the congestion relief and maintenance table that's in the ordinance. I'm sorry, it's in the board policy. And then we've asked them, what kind of output are you doing for this project? So how many miles of roadway are you paving? And then the outcome would be that they're readjusting congestion or that they're increasing traffic flow. So as for right now, we just started out with the 2016 RTIP, and we're going to bring that to you during your July meeting, a draft version of that report. And then we'll go back and kind of refine it, and then we've asked them to do it every 2 years to follow the biennial for right now, and then we can discuss that with ITALC as a whole to see if we want to change that going forward.
Do you still have, I'm not saying you personally, but does Sandag still have the program where they had sort of best practices where a group of people get together from the different local agencies and compare ways to function in a more, what will I say, effective manner? They still have it? She's
Right,
shaking her
so-
head, yes.
Yeah, so staff has been working with, that's CTAC, the
Yes,
Cities and County
that's it.
Transportation Advisory Committee, who has used a lot of input with regard to this recommendation, and so we always try to check back with them when we have ideas or we hear from you, hey, this is what ITALC would like to see, this is what staff thinks, and what do you think about it? So yes, there's a lot of sharing going on in terms of best practices there, and also recognition of the fact that one size doesn't fit all, so what works for one city doesn't necessarily work for another. And they have been very involved in implementation of this, as Michelle mentioned. So they are the ones going into Project Track, that software system, and actually checking the box or listing how many miles of, pavement or how many miles of sidewalk or feet of sidewalk rather, I guess, they anticipate or they estimate that project will give us in terms of output. And so that's what your recommendation was getting at. If you wanted to see more of an output as opposed to an outcome, which we were already reporting with that annual status report that Alex Estrella brings to you once a year, which he will bring in conjunction with Michelle's item probably in July or sometime this summer, so that you can kind of get, look at both of those together and give us some direction on how you'd like us to proceed or make that improvements on that.
I wanted to follow through on something since he brought up the streets and roads. This is just walking around the neighborhood noticing that a utility vendor had, of course, made a trench in the San Diego street to put in new pipeline and wires. However, the city doesn't come back and inspect because, in my opinion, the utility company did not do a professional job of putting new asphalt down. And already after a couple of rains, it's starting to chop up. And I know that the city's been accused of not having people to do the follow-up after somebody else comes into the roadway to do work. And I wondered, is there any way we can mention that this is bothersome? Because it eventually costs us, the taxpayer, more money when the city of San Diego, after many calls for new potholes, decides, my God, we better do something about this because the whole thing is a big pothole. And it could have been prevented if they had somebody, an inspector, inspecting work. So how do we get this, out there?
I think the city of San Diego has on their website a way that you can report potholes, so that might be one avenue.
But it's not really, you see, right now it's just bad work.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Pothole. It's
Yeah.
just, but maybe there's a way to comment on that through that. Another one, well, City of San Diego is coming back to you not till October, but
I guess
I don't
I'll
know,
move it till
suppose we could. Yeah. So other ideas.
Probably bring it up to their city council.
Bringing it up to the city council. We can share it with Alex Estrella, who works, with the CTAC. So
Okay, that would be
they can
great.
mention it at one of their meetings, just kind of as a follow-up to comments at the ITALC meeting.
Future meeting schedule. I'm not going to be able to make it, so our illustrious vice chair has agreed to chair this again on May 11th. And sorry, I can't be, I'll be out of town. I asked Ariana, I made sure I made enough to warrant me remaining chair. I guess I'm I do want to thank Ariana and Lisa Kondratnoff. Did I get that right?
Yes.
I know that the hearing Transportation Committee, that was interesting. The chairman passed on that introduction, and I said it, so I felt it. So thank you for preparing me for the report on the audit. And Mark Davis did a great job. Good guy. Anything else? We go to the order? All right, am I missing something?
We're good. So for your next meeting then in May, would you be available to?
Yeah, I asked him to do it. I gave him the draft here. So. I didn't quite get there. No, you were 10:27.
Yeah. Close. Pretty close.
Thank you all.